New movies, that's an interesting take, because these movies have always been made for kids. These movies are always designed to be family movies, and they're aimed at the younger audiences. They're not for older people. They may have little things here and there that appeal to the fans, but really what we have to understand is that Disney and Lucasfilm really are aiming these movies to be family movies. These movies aren't for us anymore. These are for the new generations, the new kids, and we gotta let them have this. We gotta let them have these movies and love these movies and nurture these movies the same way we did with the original trilogy, and the same way my generation did with the prequel trilogy when they were coming out. Now,
I don't think you're necessarily someone who makes bad arguments. I just think that you don't see where other people are coming from when you make your arguments. From your standpoint, everything you say is perfectly logical. From my standpoint, all I see is holes in your argument because I don't think you realize what your argument means for me. I don't like these movies, you know, and if they're family movies and they're not, and I don't consider them better than something like Transformers, well, then I'm going to take my family, my kids, this new generation, to a movie that I think is better than this and is better than Transformers. I'm not going to take them to a movie that I don't think is good. So how can you let the next generation have these movies when that's the situation? Like I said earlier, there are good movies being made. What use is a bad movie when there are good movies being made? Stamping the name Star Wars on a sci-fi film is not reason enough to go see and support that film. And I think that the people who actually believe otherwise are living in the past and holding on to something that doesn't exist anymore.
Because this fan backlash did 100% lead to George Lucas selling Star Wars to Disney. Because he just had enough. He'd had enough. He didn't want to deal with it anymore.
Okay, I also have a contention with that statement. I know it to be somewhat inaccurate. I'm sure it played its part, but George Lucas, regardless of how he may come off, is not a powder puff. That may have been one of the reasons, but when you're talking about millions of dollars and billions of dollars, almost nothing happens 100% for just one reason. I remember back in around 2005 or so, after the Revenge of the Sith came out, George Lucas doing an interview, and they asked him if he was going to make any more Star Wars movies, and he said, well, no, I don't expect to be around long enough to make more Star Wars movies. Clearly that wasn't his only reason for saying that, but it was definitely the one he gave that day. And then you have to take into account, for that last decade that he owned Star Wars, he was constantly tinkering with 3 movies. I mean, just indiscriminately taking scenes out and adding them in, adding in eyelids on Ewoks, and how many different special editions were there over that amount of time? 3? You know, it's not like he was doing any work there. He was making small decisions and telling talented computer techs or whatever to do X. And then they would do X, and then he would sell it. At some point, I think it had to dawn on him that he's not really doing any work, and yet he's wearing out this rug for no reason. But on top of all of that, you have to remember that around the time he sold it, he started a new family at like 70-something years old. Something like that absolutely has to drastically change someone like George Lucas's priorities in life. And still, as he was planning to sell it, he was writing the new trilogy. You put all that together, I don't think he was a broken man. I think, yeah, he didn't want the backlash, but he was writing this new trilogy. He was going to sell it off to people he thought he could make the movies because he didn't think he was going to be around. Lo and behold, he's still here, you know. But clearly at the time, he was definitely someone who was aware of his own mortality. And he thought that, hell, handing his creation over to the mega famous company Disney to basically take over would be a good idea. But, you know, if you're that broken and over backlash, then you don't write the next 3 movies and hand it over to Disney, expecting them to actually use your ideas.
But again, I think the big picture of this is getting lost. I don't think Star Wars is dead. So I say this at the end of the video too, and I know a lot of people who have watched this probably haven't watched it to the end. I do not think Star Wars is dead. I love where Star Wars is. I love the movies, and I will continue to praise the movies. I will buy the movies. I will support the franchise. I will do whatever I can do to keep this franchise going. And Disney and Lucasfilm, they're gonna cater towards the fans like me who enjoy this, because they're gonna cater towards the people who enjoy their work.
If you really believe that, would you have made this video? I mean, kind of, this is the way I see it. If Disney is just going to do what you say and cater to the people that enjoy The Last Jedi and stuff like that, then this entire issue is a non-issue. Because we all already know what Disney's going to do. I think it's a whole lot less certain an issue than what Disney is putting forward and kind of what you're putting forward as well. Businesses like Disney that are huge, they thrive off of uncertainty. What Disney shows you and me is maybe not even half the story that goes on behind the scenes. What we can do in order to assess what might be happening And what is probably happening is, look at the evidence. Hasbro came out and took blame for what happened with the toys recently. Irregardless of whether or not it's Hasbro's fault or not, there was a problem with the merchandise, which is a huge problem for Disney. In fact, as far as Star Wars is concerned, that is the biggest problem for Disney. Cartoons get canceled when toys don't sell. When Star Wars merchandise doesn't sell, it's just as bad.
They need to be able to make stuff that they know people are going to react well to. Sure, maybe they could address some of the criticisms. I don't think The Last Jedi is a perfect movie. I think it has flaws, but I still love it in spite of that. The same way that I love the original trilogy, even though that has massive flaws as well, and we need to understand that. Yeah.
People need to understand that there are flaws and then there are flaws. And one degree of the flaws is so much worse than the other that you should never discuss them both together and conflate them that way. I mean, a lot of the flaws that George Lucas did with the original trilogy happened for a reason. You know, they needed to push the story forward. A lot of the flaws I see in this new trilogy happen for no reason. They don't push the story forward. It was just stupid and irresponsible. And in a movie where someone is spending hundreds of millions of dollars on to make and expecting billions of dollars in return, they should never happen. I mean, anytime I mention the inexcusable scientific inaccuracies in the new trilogy, someone always comes and tells me, well, there were flaws in all of the trilogies, and this is fantasy, so you need to excuse it. So I'll just point out a little bit of these. In The Empire Strikes Back, Han and Leia couldn't go to Lightspeed in the Millennium Falcon. They traveled from the Hoth system to Bespin in, well, far less time than they should have been able to, at sublight speeds. That was done in order to move the story forward. You can say it's bad, and I would agree with you, but that's what happened, and at least it moved the story forward. There's a video on a YouTube channel, I think the channel is called Dave Stewart, but anyway, the video is entitled, Fantasy Does Not Excuse Impossibility, or something like that. But more often than not, when you're creating fantastic worlds, it's just the nature of the beast that the world doesn't quite hold together as well as the real world does. You kind of end up having to excuse quite a lot. But then there's the unnecessary, blatantly stupid flaws that I see in the sequel trilogy. And you can just imagine me sitting there in the theater. It's beyond words because they don't even move the story forward. I mean, the one I love to point out is when Han is watching the Hosnian system get blown up from the planet he's on. He's light years away, and their positions in the sky from where he's at would make it seem as if the planets are literally light years away from each other, like stars would be. I'm looking at that, and I'm like, you don't have to be the least bit scientifically literate in order to see there's something drastically wrong there. I mean, first I'll just point out that you would never see that event happen from that distance. But if you could, your vision of that event would converge to one point. There wouldn't be 4 or 5 points in the sky that are light years apart. To explain it better, it's like if your vision could go on forever, but the farther it got, the less accurate your vision would get, as it does in reality, but it still goes on forever, so you can see forever. And 5 explosions go off at the exact same moment, 1,000 miles away. And let's say that each of these explosions are a distance of about a mile away from each other. So they're 1,000 miles away from you, but they're a mile away from each other. You wouldn't see all 5 of those explosions. You would see one explosion. And the same thing would happen with 5 planets that you watch blow up from light years away if they were in the same star system. And the real problem is that it doesn't move the story at all. It's not like Han watching that happen prepared him to escape the planet because the First Order was going to be coming. No, it wasn't a warning at all. The First Order arrived like 2 seconds later. So I just named several scientific inaccuracies with that scene, and why did they show it? George Lucas's situation is almost a flaw of necessity. Not quite, but almost. There is an argument to be made that Lando didn't have to be stationed at some different star system at all. But still, the 2 flaws are not comparable. J.J. Abrams' flaw there was the flaw of someone who doesn't know what he's doing.
Respect all opinions if you want your opinions respected. And
no, this I totally disagree with, because the situation inevitably is a business situation, and not all opinions are created equal. Opinion doesn't reflect reality. Opinions can be false, they can be wrong, and some of them deserve to be disrespected. I completely understand the kindler, gentler argument. I definitely think there's a place for that. I also think there's a place for a sterner argument as well. And everything I'm saying generally is about business. And I'm talking about the film creators, the filmmakers, the film executives, the film studios. If people want to go out there and cuss themselves out because they liked or disliked this movie, that's between them, as far as I'm concerned. I'm much less concerned with what they do than I am with what Disney and Lucasfilm does. I don't agree with threats of any kind, but short of that, almost anything, whatever. It has very little bearing on the situation as far as whether or not it's going to change anything.
A lot of people have been using this analogy that is, if a chef cooks me a meal that I don't like, why would I blame the other people in the restaurant or blame myself for a bad meal? No, you wouldn't. You would go up to the chef and you would reasonably say to him, I didn't like this meal. This is what you can do better in the future. I'd like my money back maybe, or whatever. You just kind of say, look mate, this wasn't a good meal. You're doing it in a reasonable way, right?
You see, I consider that a bad analogy. What I would compare to this is if the chef, plucked a few hairs out of his head and then stuck it in your burrito or something and then gave it to you. And then you have a situation where you do go up to him and it isn't so civil.
What you guys are doing, to use your analogy, is you're getting a meal that you don't like and you're throwing it across the room in a fit of rage, running around the restaurant like crazy, going up to other people in the restaurant who'd like the food, saying, you're a idiot for liking this food. Why the do you like this food, you soy boy? You. And then running over to the next person. Why are you still eating this? You need to boycott this food because we need to let the restaurant know that the food is they need to make better food. And then you run up to the chefs, the people running the restaurant, and you go, you, I hate you, I'm boycotting everything you do. You ruin my life, you ruin my childhood, you're all That is everything kind of in a nutshell. That's kind of how I'm perceiving everything here. If you want to use that analogy, you need to take that really seriously.
Yeah, but if the chef's going around sticking his hairs in everyone's food, I think you would want to tell people that and get them to boycott the place. In the end, they don't have to listen to us, and if there are no consequences for them, more power to them. But if there are consequences that affect their bottom line, well, they can't say that we didn't tell them so. In the most emphatic, non-violent way possible. And right now, some of the most convincing evidence I've seen, I watched a video, I think the YouTube channel I watched yesterday was Loftus something. Anyway, I watched it, and he was reviewing the ad for the Blu-ray. And Rose Tico was nowhere in it. You know, and a couple of other things, like I don't think Holdo was in it either. So they're purposefully neglecting or excluding these, some of the most hated aspects of this film in their advertisement for the Blu-ray. They're not doing that because a certain amount of people like the film. They're doing that because a certain amount of people disliked it. The entire issue rests on Disney's bottom line.
I don't think Disney have anything to apologise. I think Disney just should keep doing what they're doing, take on some advice, take on some criticisms, but again, just keep turning a blind eye to the people who are being hateful and spiteful and just really, really mean-spirited, just so unpolitically correct. I mean, I'm sick of
And that's why, Phil, you can't begin to put yourself in their shoes. So when you say they need to do this and they need to act this way, you're not speaking to them, you're speaking at them, and you're speaking through them, and they're not hearing you. Look, you seem like a nice guy and everything, but pretending like Disney doesn't realize how cutthroat business is and their business is, I think it's naive. Pretending like George Lucas didn't know. He knew. Figuratively speaking, both George Lucas and Disney have cut their fair share of throats in their day. So that's it. I have nothing against people who like this movie, unless they come to my channel to troll me or something. So I would invite my audience not to go to his channel and troll him. But if you want to go to his channel and watch his videos and maybe give some constructive criticism, I'm sure he would welcome that. I don't view the people who like this movie as the problem. You know, going there and trying to change their mind, if you can do so, great. But this is a business situation. You have to talk to and about the people who are doing the business. And you can do that with a YouTube video, you can do that with your wallet. And I see no problem screaming at them that they jumped into the pool without checking the water level first. Like, comment, subscribe, hit the notification bell, and as always, if you're listening, you are the new rebellion. 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 You are the new